welcome to today's webinar, The Art of Asking Why Leaders Should Listen. This is such a great topic. We've got some great speakers for you here today. Over 100 people signed up, so clearly this is a topic that's generating some interest. My name is Bethany Whitted. I am a people and learning consultant here at Titus Talent, so I'll be your host for the next 30 to 45 minutes. We'll do like 30 minutes of content and then 15 minutes for questions at the end. One thing that we want you to keep in mind is that we want this to be an interactive webinar. So feel free to join the conversation, type your comments and questions in the chat, and we will address them. We might get to some of them in the moment, and if we don't, we will save them for the end and go through questions at the end. If we do run out of time, because we do want to respect your time, we want to keep it around 45 minutes, we will follow up with you and make sure that your question gets answered. So again, feel free, type your questions, type your comments in the chat. We'd love for you to join in on this webinar and make it really interactive. And again, this will be recorded so that you can watch it later. So before we dig into the content, I wanted to let you know about our learning and development team here at Titus Talent. Our learning and development team identifies gaps among employees and teams and then develops and delivers customized solutions to bridge those gaps. So this material that you're hearing about today on why leadership should listen, this is a little bit of a teaser for one of our leadership development courses called Turning Managers into Coaches. In that training, we explore more fully how to be a great listener, and even beyond that, how to be a great coach, give feedback, communicate well, build relationships with employees, all those things. So if you're interested in a more intense training, not just on listening, but coaching as well, please reach out to our training team. We'd love to just have a conversation with you and see what we can do for you, see how we can help. Towards the end of this webinar, we will have a QR code that you can use to scan and check out our current learning and development offerings. So more on that later in the webinar. We have awesome speakers here today. I'm joined by Jeff Boucher and Ariel Wozniak. Jeff Boucher is amazing. He's a senior director here at Titus Talent. He oversees the operations of one of our largest regions here at Titus. So he has been leading successful teams here for over 10 years, done a lot of listening along the way. He's a strong leader with a great sense of humor and a very skilled communicator, and he loves challenging his teams to think differently. And then we also have Ari Wozniak. Ari is our Senior Manager of Talent Optimization. So she is a very experienced HR professional and particularly an expert when it comes to helping people understand each other in the workplace. So she helps teams communicate and operate successfully through mainly behavioral assessments and team consultations. So couldn't think of two better people to talk on this topic today. So again, our topic is the art of asking why leaders should listen. Big topic right now. Everyone wants to work under a great listener. Listening builds trust, it enhances decision-making, and it demonstrates this humility and curiosity that we love to see from our leaders. It makes us want to follow them, right? So we're gonna approach this topic from kind of three different angles. So first, we're gonna look at the benefits of listening for leaders. So when leaders take the time to slow down and listen, what benefits do they get as a leader? Secondly, we're going to think about the team. So teams working under leaders who are great listeners, who know how to slow down and listen to them and make them feel heard. What does that do for the team? And then finally, we're going to kind of like zoom out and think about the company at large. So what benefit does a company get when all of its leaders are world-class listeners? How does that change the culture of a company? And then we'll end with some broad tips on how to enhance your asking and listening tools. So we want to leave you with some practical things that you can think about to improve your listening skills right away. So Jeff, can you kick us off with some of the benefits of listening for leaders themselves?
Yes, thanks, Bethany. The past few days, I've spent some time with this content, kind of talking to myself about listening, and ironically, listening to myself, which could be a topic for another webinar in and of itself. But I wanted to find this amazing quote about the power of listening, the one that you may find in a conference room in the 1990s next to that motivational poster of teamwork where all of the people are skydiving. Bonus points if you happen to be looking at that poster right now in your conference room. But it may just be most impactful to say that true listening is the cheat code for leaders. It's a learned behavior that can turn good leaders into great leaders. And I feel like today's topic presents a really unique opportunity for you to practically apply some of the topics in this webinar, listening. So I invite you to shut down the other 50 tabs that you have open, likely close out Teams and Slack, and spend a few minutes with us fully present today, and hopefully grab one or more takeaways that could change a relationship that you have. And maybe it's an employee, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a spouse or partner. Why? Because great listeners make great leaders. But let's be honest, great listeners are hard to come by. I'm sure we can all remember a leader who just never seemed to stop talking, never sought out our opinion, rarely asked how we were, or maybe they did ask, but you never left the conversation feeling like they actually heard you. Yes, great listeners make great leaders, but listening is such a rare leadership skill. Part of the problem is that leaders are typically selected into people management positions based upon their ability to know the answers. Thus, it's common for leaders to adopt an expert mentality and undervalue the perspective of others. Leaders often operate out of the assumption that it's their duty to know all of the answers, to tell others how things work, and to explain the unknown to their followers. So 3 benefits the leaders get from listening to employees. They're on your screen now. Number 1 is increased self-awareness. Number 2 is increased ability to influence their people. And also, and lastly, they make better decisions. So we're going to dive into each of those right now. So first, increased self-awareness. Self-awareness is a critical component of leadership success. Tasha Eurich is an organizational psychologist who studies self-awareness. She found that 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% actually are. How do we become more self-aware? We need to ask people who work with us for feedback and listen. Leaders who go out of their way to solicit the opinions of their direct reports have a key advantage of greater self-awareness. Secondly, leaders who listen gain the trust of their teams. That trust, in turn, leads to better cooperation. It's been said that trust is the currency of leadership. In other words, if we want people to follow us, they've got to trust us first. The more they trust us, the greater ability for influence we have. And one way that we can build that trust is by listening. Finally, leaders who listen to the perspective of others are able to make better decisions. Leaders who are overconfident in their own opinions miss the insights of their direct reports, and they're more prone to jump to conclusions. I believe so strongly in these benefits, specifically the power of self-awareness. As you grow in your career and you take on more responsibility, the amount of time that you have decreases. And a powerful moment for me was when I discovered exactly how I was making that time up. I was stealing it from conversations, from one-on-ones, skip-level meetings, check-ins, all divisional meetings. Being a remote culture, I was always in front of my laptop, in front of my inbox, in front of my teams, and I was caught half listening. And I think half listening takes 2 forms. It's either you're only thinking about what you're going to say next during a conversation, or you're multitasking. And I'd hear things like, "You've got extreme typing face," meaning that I wasn't even hiding the fact that I was multitasking. I certainly wasn't engaged in the conversation. And it's through that direct feedback that I worked hard to practice on whole listening, being hyper present during those conversations and during those times that helps build the trust and influence that I need during the harder conversations. One way that I practice whole listening, specifically on video calls, is by showing your hands and leaning in. This was a tip that Daniel Mormon shared with me, and he talks about bringing your hands into the screen. And this is has the psychological effect of everyone knowing that I'm not typing, I'm not scrolling, I'm not multitasking. I'm present, I'm leaned in, and I'm earning that influence.
So good, Jeff. Thank you for those tips. A lot of benefits that leaders themselves get from listening. But now I want to transition this to Ari. So Ari, you work with teams all the time. You've seen the miscommunications that can happen between leaders and their teams. How do teams benefit when their leaders take the time to really listen?
Awesome. Thanks, Bethany. I absolutely love this. I love these types of webinars before I even jump into mine, but just listening to Jeff, like I hope you all are taking notes and really absorbing this information, because I feel like these are things that each of us could start to use in not only our work life, but in our personal life as well. So talking about teams, I do get to work with teams every day, and I absolutely love that work. I love helping teams to better understand each other and to be able to work together. And as a leader of a team, this is your core responsibility to make sure that your team is working together well. So when you're listening, there are three major benefits, which you'll see here on your screen, that your team will get to experience because of your listening. So number one is confidence. Your people will gain greater confidence, which leads to greater performance when they recognize that their leader is listening to them. Number two is development. So this just creates massive development opportunities when you actually listen to your people. And then number three is engagement. Your people will become more strategic, more engaged, and proactive when you listen to them. So let's go ahead and break down each of these three benefits. And we'll start off first with confidence. So we all know that it feels great to be listened to. It feels great when you see someone like Jeff put their hands in the screen and you know that this person is here and they're focused on you. Listening is a sign of respect. So when leaders listen to their teams and to their employees, you're essentially sending this message that what you say is valuable. What you say matters. I believe you have something worthwhile to say. And so it's long been established that confidence and competence go hand in hand. So when you boost your employees' confidence, they'll try new things. They'll end up stretching themselves and pushing past any self-imposed barriers. Listening to your employees essentially is going to help them to build the self-efficacy necessary for growth. So that confidence is so important, and you can help them to instill that confidence by simply listening to what they're saying. And this feeds nicely into the next point here, which is development. So asking your direct reports questions creates a development opportunity. When we allow our people to come to us with problems, we can either give them the answers, which is what I know so many of us are just, we're just natural problem solvers. And so that's what we typically would do. Or we can challenge them to solve their own problems by asking questions. And this is what we would definitely recommend, is that you allow your people to solve their own problems. So for example, you may come to someone for their input on a key decision. I know that my leader does this all the time with me, and I always appreciate that because I know that my voice matters on the team. And then it gives me opportunities to continue stretching and growing. And by you doing that, essentially you are providing your employee with a platform to think strategically, to consider their knowledge, their experience, and then for them to generate an informed decision or informed opinion versus you coming in and fixing the problem. So we don't want to create teams that merely just take marching orders and that you tell them what to do and they go off and do that thing. You really want to develop teams of critical thinkers, of problem solvers. You want to give that space needed for them to share their ideas and to influence decisions. And then lastly, let's hit on engagement here. So as you can imagine, when we listen to our employees, demonstrating that respect for their opinion and incorporating them into decision making, we create much more engaged teams. So our people become more proactive and productive when we take the time to listen. And that's simply because when you let the employee do the talking about the company, about the strengths, about weaknesses, about how they might contribute to the company and moving it forward, etc., they become more invested and engaged. And they actually take on ownership for the success of the team. And so rather than trying to impose engagement on our people, it actually flows naturally because they feel that this is their team, this is their responsibility as well, and so they're hyper engaged in the team and in the success of that team. So
That's great, Ari. So much gold there. And I think it kind of flips everything we think about naturally when we think about develop on its head, right? When we think about development, we tend to think leader imparts knowledge on follower. And while there's certainly times for that, we can develop people so much just by kind of stepping out of the way and asking them questions, giving them the platform to develop their own strategic thinking skills. So good. Now, Jeff, I want to kind of take a bird's eye view at this. When leaders are doing this well, they're listening to their teams, they're getting their buy-in on decisions, they're getting their voice, they're developing them, teams are becoming more engaged. What impact does this have on the overall company?
Yeah, thanks, Bethany. Well, I think when leaders are great listeners, it has a ripple effect across the entire company. Obviously, we talked about the benefits to the leaders themselves, benefits to the team, but organizations full of great listeners experience better ideas, a positive impact on culture and collaboration. So let's talk about ideas. So you see on the screen here, ideas. The company is strengthened through upward communication. So let's talk about upward communication. That's really messages that begin at the more junior levels of the organization and make their way up. These valuable messages only make themselves up the chain of command if we have leaders who listen well. So upward communication is extremely valuable, right? But it's also very rare because few leaders listen well. Often it becomes a game of telephone, and the messages from the lowest levels get distorted as they make their way back up. Secondly, culture. It says here the company creates an inclusive culture. When we listen, we do our part to create a trusting and inclusive culture. We actually change the culture by listening well. So let me just pause and say that again. We actually change culture by listening well. If that's not the number one question we get at Titus Talent, it's got to be in the top 5 is how can we change our culture? How can we have a positive impact on our culture? We've built entire divisions in our company to address this. And here's a way that costs $0. Imagine your organization if everyone was a world-class listener. How would that impact your culture? And finally, collaboration. Listening is the bedrock of effective collaboration and innovation. Why is collaboration important? Because it leads to better decision-making, creativity, innovation, and team building. So collaboration is a great thing, but there really is no shot at meaningful collaboration without listening. Leaders become better collaborators by listening, but they also model great listening skills to the people they're interacting with. This in turn sets into motion a culture of listening, a culture where people don't feel like they have to fight to get their 2 cents in, and a culture where people are genuinely curious and open to others' opinions. One way that I've adopted this upward communication into my team is by setting skip level meetings. So quarterly, we'll have 1-over-1 meetings to where you get to have a chance to sit with your boss's boss. And you can set the agenda yourself, you can come together, and it's really a way to listen to, are they being managed well? Do they have ideas that you can immediately implement? And are they being supported for growth? So skip level meetings is something that we do here at Titus Talent. I certainly encourage you, if you're not doing it already, to bring that into your culture.
Great tips, Jeff. Thank you. I love what you said about culture. Like, this is a chance to really shape the culture when we become better listeners. And I think we all want to be part of that culture. And I think we can imagine what happens on the opposite end of the spectrum where we have interruptions, we're fighting to get our time, our stage time, our face time, get our ideas out there, and no one's listening. And like you said, that really is the bedrock of collaboration. So if you want better collaboration, if you want more learning, different perspectives going into different decisions at your company, it all centers on listening. Wow. So that's great segue into our next portion of this webinar, which is going to be some listening tips. So we didn't just want to tell you all the benefits of listening. We actually wanted to give you a little teaser into some of our trainings that have bits on listening in them and give you some tips that you can take from this webinar to enhance your own listening skills. So Ari, take it away. Tell us what are some tips that we can use to enhance our listening skills.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're all about actually taking, excuse me, taking action on the things that you're learning throughout this webinar. And so what we want to talk to you is about how you can actually become a better listener and give you just 3 very broad tips. Again, these are more fully explored in our leadership development trainings and our leadership development offerings. But these tips are ones that if you started doing immediately today, you're going to notice a difference within your team. So number 1, and I feel like this is the hardest of them all, it may just be for me, but surrendering the outcome of the conversation. So essentially what this means is that you're coming into the conversation that you're having with someone with your ears open and your agenda is pushed to the side. When you come into a conversation ready to listen, it's really tough because often we already have the topic of the conversation and we know where we want the conversation to land, but you do your people a huge injustice when you just go forward with your agenda without listening to what other people may have to offer to the conversation. And so the way that I've seen this play out before is that we pause and politely listen to what other people might say, but we're on a mission. And so we have a mission that kind of guides the conversation to its final destination, which we've already predetermined. And so surrendering the conversation, or surrendering the outcome of the conversation rather, means that we don't try to control where the conversation lands. Again, we can have the topics that we want to talk about, but we don't know exactly where it's going to end up. And we have to be okay with that and surrender that outcome so that we can have a productive conversation where everyone's voice is actually heard. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to listen to the overarching point, desire, or message being expressed. So often we can get caught up in the details and try to remember every single thing that someone said, or maybe we're taking notes during the conversation, which can be fine as well. But I think there's just this power in truly just being present. And as Jeff said, like being a part of that conversation, showing them that you are actively listening and just getting the overarching theme of the conversation. You don't have to memorize all the facts. Instead, if you listen for the main ideas that are being expressed, you can react to that after you've actually taken that information in and giving them an opportunity to speak and guide that conversation. And then tip number 3 is to listen to understand rather than evaluate. I know that many of us are problem solvers and we're solutionists and we want to come to the conversation and just solve whatever problem it is that someone has. And we may be thinking in our heads, like, as we're listening, okay, that's right, that's wrong, and kind of solving things in the background. But what we want to try to do instead is to understand what the speaker is saying and why they believe the way that they believe. No one wants to be constantly evaluated as they're speaking. So instead of immediately evaluating or jumping into problem solving mode, leaders can benefit from seeking to understand why their people hold the views that they hold. And this really, like I said, it goes hand in hand with not needing to be the solution finder for everyone's problem. So a good question that you can ask here when someone comes to you with some sort of issue that you think like, oh, I can solve this problem for them, is instead asking, how can I support you in this? Or what do you think you should do about this situation? That again is going to give them that confidence to really stretch and to solve the problem themselves and not have you be constantly solving everyone's problems, because again, we want to build teams of strategic thinkers.
So good, Ari. I feel like all of those are very difficult for me, but particularly that third one, listening to understand and then evaluate. That's pretty radical, especially as leaders. I think we're like always in evaluation mode. And I think it goes back to that trust is the currency of leadership. And when people feel understood, they're far more cooperative, right? And they actually want to listen to other people. So again, changing the culture. Setting into motion a culture of listening and setting into motion an inclusive culture where we're trying to understand one another. These are definitely easier said than done and take a lot of practice. Definitely all on a journey with these 3 tips. We're going to turn and look at some of our additional courses on this topic. And as I'm going through these, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We're about to get to the Q&A portion. So if there's a question that's been popping in your head, go ahead and type it in so we know it's there. So I wanted to make you aware of our current offer. From now until February 28th, we are offering these 3 open courses for the price of 2. So essentially, we've got these 3 quick open courses coming up. The first one is going to be just around the corner on February 28th. This is for coaching for performance and alignment. And just to preface this, these are all condensed versions of our more lengthier, intensive, interactive style trainings, some of which are 3-hour sessions. So what we wanted to do with these quicker sessions is to accommodate the busy schedules of many leaders and perhaps some of those budget constraints. So these are designed to be condensed, value-packed versions of longer, more interactive sessions that we offer. Okay, so first one coming up is on February 28th, Coaching for Performance and Alignment. This session is all about helping leaders know how to engage both performance and engagement gaps on your team. So if you're a leader and you're looking for some practical guidance on how to address those underperformers on your team, or those people who show up to work and they're just not enthusiastic about the company, they're not engaged with your mission, this is going to be one that you are definitely going to want to save your seat for. It's all about equipping leaders with the right communication skills to enter these conversations in a way that promotes growth and develops relationships. So that is coming up on February 28th, and that's going to be a 1.5-hour session. Secondly, we've got feedback as a gift coming up on March 2nd. Giving and receiving feedback is just one of those inevitable parts of being a leader, and it can be really difficult to deliver feedback well. So our goal with this quick 1-hour session is to give you the essentials to delivering feedback that's going to fuel not only performance, but also relationships and engagement. And then another focus of this feedback as a gift session is going to be responding to feedback that's given to us. So as you can imagine, listening is going to come up there for sure. So we've got our solo session for feedback as a gift for March 2nd. So that's great if you're kind of a leader or just an individual that wants to join the training. And then we're also offering a team training session that will be great for teaching teams how to create a culture of giving and receiving feedback to one another. So we've got the solo session on March 2nd, and then the team training on March 15th. And then finally, we've got the coaching difference coming up on March 29th. So this is another 1-hour session giving you the bullet points of what coaching is. You've probably heard a lot about coaching lately. It's a big deal. It's kind of the direction of leadership development these days. So we're going to tell you what it is and how it works, how it motivates and develops your people effectively. And then we're also going to introduce and outline the 4 main coaching skills. And those are self-awareness, humble inquiry, surrendered listening, and transformational feedback. So there's so much richness and so much value in these trainings. And for a limited time, we're going to offer 3 for the price of 2. And essentially, these are $200 sessions. So you're getting a $600 value for $400 right now. And if you'd like to get creative and maybe send 3 people to one of these trainings, we can also do that. We can do sign up your first 2 people and then email the name of your 3rd person to learning@titustalent.com. And we will get that 3rd person in there for free. So you can do it 2 3 for 2 and do 3 different trainings, or you can send 3 people to 1 training for the price of 2 people. So that is our current offer right now. And go ahead and scan this QR code for more details and times on each of these sessions. And we'd love to hear from you on that. Secondly, if this has piqued your interest, but you're like, I've got more questions, or maybe you're like, I actually think I want to do the more in-depth, more interactive versions of these trainings, please schedule a free learning and development consultation. We would love to get to know you, give you some of our time. We've got a team of experts ready to help you find the best solutions and really hit where your most pressing organizational pain points are. And I should mention too that we have offerings beyond leadership development. So things for your entire organization can benefit from. We have a diverse catalog of cost-saving, customizable virtual training options available. So go ahead and scan this QR code to schedule some time with us. We'd love to sit down and talk to you and just have a conversation. All right, we're going to get to some of those exciting questions now. So here we have a question for those currently working with an individual contributor role. Do you have suggestions for listening like a leader without having any direct reports? What a good question. So if you're not in one of those leadership seats, but you are an individual contributor and presumably collaborating with people, how do you show off your listening skills and listen like a leader without those direct reports? Ari, do you want to answer this one for us?
Yeah, I knew you would call on me, Bethany. No, I think it's so interesting, this question, like about being in a specific seat, because I truly look at leaders as any individual who like leads. You can lead a project, you can lead something within your workplace. You don't necessarily have to be a leader of people to listen like a leader. And what I mean by that is that leaders are really the ones who slow down and they listen and they're present. And all the tips that we've talked about throughout today, you can do that with anyone. So I could have a conversation with Bethany. I'm not her leader, but I could say, hey, Bethany, I want to hear from you. I want to hear how you're doing or how things are going or what I can support you with. I think just listening with that open mind and being someone who's there to serve, you can do that in any seat throughout the organization. You don't have to have a title to do that. And I think that makes you a leader in the current seat that you're in, but prepares you for the next, just by being servant-hearted and asking how you can support people and being there and being present. I think all those things are regardless of the seat that you actually sit in.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Ari. And earlier you mentioned like these are great tips that help you in life too, like in your personal relationships even. Just great communication skills. Communication is probably less about talking and more about listening. Jeff, I think this question's perfect for you. Do you have any tips to help increase trust without sounding like you're prying?
Yeah, no, thank you. So I operate under the you get what you give mentality. And I think that if you go into conversations as a leader and you're open to being vulnerable and you're open to being humble in those conversations, that over time you absolutely will build trust. I think that you need to be patient with that. It probably won't come immediately. So patience and also consistency, having that consistent touch point, knowing that as a leader, you're going to be there for these individuals week in and week out. So patience and consistency, being open, being vulnerable, and being humble in those conversations, I believe will help you increase trust. And it's not like you're prying to get that information from them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. The more trust is formed, the more you can dig a little deeper with those questions. This is a really interesting question, Ari. I would love your take on it. So I'm going to read the full thing because it has a little bit of background here. So I love getting input from my team and think it's extremely valuable. However, fostering a culture like this can also create too many cooks in the kitchen where everyone wants their opinion heard. How do you balance listening/team input while also letting your team know that there does need to be someone in charge with final say? So are there times when maybe we don't need to take all the time in the world to listen? Ari, how do we balance that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as I saw that one come in, I was like, I do hope that I get called on for that one. So I love that question of you're taking everyone's input, but at the end of the day, you as a team leader, you do have to lead the team. And so ultimately, you are the one who's responsible for the success or the failure of the team. And so you can take everyone's input into consideration, but I think it's always valuable to let your team know that hey, I do have to make a decision to move forward. And sometimes as managers, we have to have tough conversations. So even outside of the listening, then you then have to go back and have this tough conversation that maybe not, everyone's not on the same page. Maybe
Mm,
everyone's not going to agree with the decisions that you've made to move forward. But as a leader, you have to be comfortable and confident doing that. So you don't always have to take everyone's opinion into consideration. It's great to get their feedback. I always let people know that I appreciate them sharing their feedback. I appreciate you speaking up and you thank them for that. And then when there are times when you can take their input into a decision and allow that to influence the decision that you make, I always want to give credit for that so that you start to build that trust that Jeff had talked about. And so then when you have to make those tough decisions that not everyone's on board for, they understand where it's coming from. They understand you as a leader, you care for them, that you care about the team and you want what's best for them. But ultimately, in some situations, you just have to be the person to say, hey, I have to make this decision without everyone's input. And there are going to be times when you have to just kind of make the decision, stick with it, and push that down. Whereas other times you have the ability to take everyone's opinion and all of that. And so I think there does have to be this balance between both of those sides. And so whenever possible, lean towards getting the opinions and letting people influence and impact and all of that so that they understand when you have to lean towards the other side, it's not that, oh, my manager just never listens to me. It's in this particular case, they had to make a tough decision. So,
right. I like that, Ari. I think it's kind of like showing them the math. Like we
yes.
heard all these decisions, and here's what the math kind of led us to.
Yeah.
And of course, there are situations where more of a managing approach to leadership is the way to go, depending on the situation. And then we've got this question here, Jeff. How do you prompt a quieter employee to speak up so you can listen? So, what about those people who are very used to letting maybe the leader do the problem solving? How do you start changing that dynamic and kind of opening up their minds and no, I really want your input on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the first part, kind of prompting a quiet employee to speak up, I think you have to provide the environment that is going to provide the most comfort for that person to do so. So we talked a little bit about skip levels. Maybe you're drawing that information in more of a one-on-one setting, where that person can feel a little bit more comfortable in providing that feedback. Gain a little confidence. I think confidence is critically important for individuals as they're starting to speak up and speak out for themselves. They can get that confidence, then they can bring it to the next level, which is more maybe team meetings. They can speak up because they know they have that confidence. And as far as really developing a process that would empower people to make decisions, I think that management, there is a learning curve to management. And I think the path of least resistance is, I'm just going to solve it for you. Kind of talked about earlier doing that. And I did that in my career. But I noticed my boss started to not solve my problems for me as we kind of developed this culture of coaching. And the process was I needed to show up to him with solutions to the problems that I had. So I adopted that with my people. And the process is that when my people come to me with issues, they know they also need to bring a potential solution with them. And
Wow. Yeah.
the amazing part about that is that 95 or more % of the time, that was the right answer. That was the right opinion. And so I think people need to come with those solutions and be empowered and grow in that confidence.
I love that answer, Jeff. I think this is like a cultural shift, right? And I think a lot of people go through this when they come to Titus and they're almost surprised at leadership's willingness to listen to anyone. Doesn't matter what level of the company you're at. And it takes a while to kind of be comfortable with that and say, no, we do want to hear what you have to say. So it's a change, and we can kind of help people get into that gradually. We have 5 minutes left, but there's a really important question, Ari, that I want you to answer for us quickly if you can. So this person says, I work in a fast-paced environment. How would you recommend I slow down and give my reports the freedom to speak?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like everyone works in a fast-paced environment nowadays. Things are just going like at the speed of light. And so it is hard for us to slow down, but prioritizing the time with your direct reports is extremely important. So internally at Titus, we do one-on-ones every single week. And I know for some organizations that may not be practical to do it every single week, but having that on your calendar, that is the moment to slow down. That is the time to talk to your direct report. It's the time for them to really use that time however they see fit, whether they have questions and they want to talk about what comes next for them in the organization. But that's the opportunity versus just waiting until everything piles up and then having a conversation. But really having that space on the calendar, I think is the way to do it, the way to slow down and have that time already set aside. I also think it's really important to understand the people that you have on your team, and understand like what kind of their motivations are or their behavioral tendencies and all of that, so that you can supply them with what they need to feel like they have the freedom to speak up. And so for some people, it may be that they need details on a bunch of things and all of that. But if you don't know it and you don't supply them with that, then they may not speak up even when you give them that one-on-one time. And so just understanding the people, meeting their needs and having that space on the calendar, I think is the best way to slow down when we're all moving so quickly every day.
Yes, I love that. I love that. My leader is so generous to give me a full hour every week, just to let me unload whatever I want to talk about. And it's beautiful and it's amazing and it's so helpful. And I think another thing here is that we're slowing down for the sake of speeding up. So hopefully
Mm,
listening over time is actually going to save you time, because you're going to create employees who can solve their own problems, who don't have to tap on your shoulder every time that they need something, because you've taken the time to slow down and develop them. So now they're critical thinkers, they're strategists, and they can solve their own problems. So that's a lot of kind of the philosophy of coaching that our coaching training sessions get into. Thank you so much for attending. While we have you here, we want to take the time to invite you to our next webinar. This has been such a great discussion, and we're going to kind of carry a little bit of this leadership listening theme into our next webinar, which is going to be on creating. It's going to be called Why Psychological Safety Matters. So you've probably heard about psychological safety. It's been a huge topic that's kind of buzzing around these days. It's more than a warm, fuzzy feeling. So I'll give you that little behind the scenes. It's actually creating an environment where people communicate candidly, they put forth their best ideas, and they engage in these sharpening conversations that push your company forward. So if you want to know more about psychological safety, go ahead and sign up for our free webinar. Again, these are all free, fun conversations for you to join. We love it when you ask us questions. And thank you so much for joining us today. All right, Jeff, Ari, anything you want to say to close us out?
No, I think I appreciate everyone kind of joining in. I think this is a powerful skill in behavior. It is learned, as I said earlier, so it's something that you can practice, and I don't think you'll ever be an expert in it. So just make sure you're focused and you're leaned in and enjoy the power of listening.
Yes, and again, I see we have a few lingering questions. We will follow up with you on those, and you can watch this again on YouTube. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next time.